From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5 political analyst Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. The voters have spoken. It's just taken a few more days and possibly a little longer to figure out exactly who they've elected to be the next president of the United States. Along with counting votes, that process may also include a demand for recounts in one or more states, as well as legal fights that could go all the way to the Supreme Court. To help us sort everything out, we've asked Middle Tennessee State University professor and dean of the Honors College there, Dr. John Vile, to join us this week on Inside Politics. Dr. Vile, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You know, in many ways, 2020 has been a year for the history books. So why not a cliffhanger in a presidential race that sees our country still so closely divided into so many battleground states? I mean, it's been quite a week.
It has. You know, it's not quite 2000, or I don't think it's going to be. Remember, then it took, early December, mid-December before we really knew the result. Looks like we're going to probably know in the next day or two. But it's been a nail-biter.
As we speak, it looks like Democrat Joe Biden is poised to win the 270 votes needed in the Electoral College to win the presidency and defeat Donald Trump for re-election. Several states still remain undecided: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Questions also remain to some degree in the upper Midwest with Michigan and Wisconsin. We've seen close elections in recent years, but can you ever remember a presidential contest with so many states still undecided 2, 3, 4 days later after the vote?
Again, 2000, of course, you have one state that becomes the focus. But no, I don't think I have. Not in recent years.
It looks like if Joe Biden is able to win a couple, even one more state at this point, it looks like the president has to run the table. Now, he did that to some degree in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, but he's got to run a whole lot more states at this point in different parts of the country, not just in the Midwest this time.
He does. I mean, Pennsylvania alone, which is now trending toward Biden, would settle the election. Even if Trump were to get that, he would still have to pick up just about every other contested state that there is.
At this point, it looks like Joe Biden's also going to carry Georgia. That would seem to be a bit of a surprise. Nobody would have thought that was going to happen. In fact, if I'm thinking correctly, Joe Biden has flipped states. He's not lost any states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. He's just built basically off that base and rebuilt that base, particularly in the Midwest.
That's right. Georgia was something of a surprise to me. A lot of this comes from decisions, as I think you and I discussed earlier, made at the state legislatures. Florida, decided to count the early votes and to count the absentee ballots as they came in, and states like Pennsylvania and Georgia and others did not. One of the fascinating things about Georgia, if it stays consistent with Biden, I believe I'm right on this, if you look at a map and you put everything in red and blue, it's unless North Carolina also goes toward Biden, which right now looks unlikely, it will be the only, I believe it's one of the few or maybe the only, other than Alaska and Hawaii, non-contiguous state. In other words, it's going to be surrounded by red states in the presidency and still go blue, whereas every other state, I believe you'll find a connection to a neighboring state.
President Trump is filing lawsuits and also talking about a recount in Wisconsin, even though Scott Walker, the former Republican governor in Wisconsin, who's been in a lot of close races up there, doesn't think the size of the margin for Biden is big enough that a recount will make any difference. The president and his people talk about being confident, but when you're asking for recounts and you're looking at lawsuits, that doesn't really say you have confidence.
It doesn't project confidence, and they're using this for fundraising. I'm not sure if there's money left over. Does he put that in a coffer if he decides to run 4 years from now? I'm not sure. But as you say, that Wisconsin, among most of the states, has had more recounts than a lot of them. And to my knowledge, none of them has ever flipped an election there.
The president has spoken twice since election night, both times sort of rambling statements that repeated a lot of his charges that somehow the mail-in votes are fraudulent, and also that there's been a lot of bad things going on in terms of the actual counts, even though the counts are being done in many Republican states, and there have been members of both parties as a part of watching over that. What's he trying to project there? Is he just trying to why does he want to make the electoral system or the way we elect presidents in this country somehow look bad? Is that because he doesn't want to admit that he got beat fair and square?
It was interesting that the meeting that he had, not the speech that he gave on election night, but earlier that night, one of his closing speeches, he said something to the effect that it sure is a lot harder to lose than to win. And I think he's just, the positive thinking sort of entrepreneurial attitude that he has is just not very comfortable admitting defeat.
Well, he almost never admits he's wrong about anything. He always generally doubles down, which raised the question. A lot of Republican leaders had been quiet about supporting the president with the idea of lawsuits and saying that the system is somehow fraudulent. But now that was before we've had this flip in the last few days or last day or so with Georgia and Pennsylvania. Now it appears to be almost a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden's going to be the president. Are they going to have to now go to the president and have a Goldwater moment as we had back in Watergate to tell the president it's time to make a tough decision and go?
I mean, somebody ought to do it, but frankly, if they don't, I could proclaim myself the emperor of the world today, and I don't think it would get me very far. I don't think unless you can somehow get the other branches of government to believe that you have been elected when both numbers seem to indicate otherwise, I think he's going to have to leave whether there's a Goldwater moment or not.
When you're looking at the situation, well, President Trump may decide he wants to bring out his supporters. There's been a little of that going on in some of the states that he's been trying to get the vote either counted or stopped.
Yes.
But so far, I think it's been remarkably quiet in terms of the protests. Fortunately, we've not seen violence. We've not seen other kind of problems. But you do get the impression that we're sort of sitting on a pressure cooker from both sides, depending on how this goes. Have we really seen the end of this? Is it going to completely depress at this point? Or are we still perhaps in some danger that when this is finally more or less decided, we might get a adverse reaction by one side or the other?
One of the glories of American democracy, and that what separates us from countries that have, military coups, that's when you expect to see, military forces in the street or people rioting. If you go over to Eastern Europe, where there's a real question as to whether there are legitimate elections, you see this. I hope, if people want to demonstrate and say, they're sorry that Trump isn't their president, that's fine. But this is, we substituted ballots for bullets, and hopefully we'll continue in that tradition.
Dr. John Weil of Middle Tennessee State University is our guest. We're talking about the still evolving situation of who's going to be the next president of the United States. Back to continue our conversation with Dr. Weil after you watch these messages.